Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the evening with the talk with Shaykh Mokhtar, inshallah. Before we begin, we'll ask Shaykh Gomaa to speak, inshallah, for this segment.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ادع إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين وإن عاقبتم فعاقبوا بمثل ما عوقبتم به ولئن صبرتم لهو خير للصابرين واصبر وما صبرك إلا بالله ولا تحزن عليهم ولا تك في ضيق مما يمكرون إن الله مع الذين اتقوا والذين هم محسنون صدق الله العظيم. Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good instruction, and argue with them in a way that is best. Indeed, your Lord is most knowing of who has strayed from his way, and he is most known of who is rightly guided. And if you punish an enemy, O believers, punish with an equivalent of that with which you were harmed. But if you are patient, it is better for those who are patient. And be patient, O Muhammad, and your patience is not but through Allah, and do not grieve over them, and do not be in distress over what they conspire. Indeed, Allah is with those who fear Him and those who are doer of good.
With that, we'd like to invite Shaykh Mokhtar Maghraoui to just give a very brief introduction. He is, mashallah, one of the most well-known scholars, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. His speciality is tazkiyat nafs and purification of soul and other spiritual talks. Even though he is well versed in all other Islamic sciences, mashallah, he conducts retreats throughout the United States and also other parts of the country to bring us closer to Allah and bring, internalize the teachings of Islam, which we all need, especially people who are living in big cities, with fast-paced lives, and they're very close to the material life. We all need this kind of spiritual awakening, inshallah. So with that, we'd like to hand over to Shaykh Mokhtar. His topic of tonight's talk is inviting to the path of peace.
والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وصحبه ومن والاه. رب زدنا علما ولا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. اللهم افتح مسامع قلوبنا لذكرك. O Allah, increase us in knowledge and do not allow our hearts to deviate from truth and guidance after you have shown them to us, and grant us from you overwhelming cover of your merciful love, of your rahmah, Ya Allah. Don't leave us to us, don't entrust us to us. Help us see truth as truth, and give us the strength to embrace it, and help us see falsehood as falsehood, and give us the strength to keep away from it. My dear brothers and sisters, I want to share with you a few reflections, intending first that they be to myself and then to you, on the concept of da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore da'wah or invitation to salam, to peace. I shall begin by first reminding ourselves that the first who called, who invited others to the home of peace is who? You don't know? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God himself. Allah says in the Qur'an, وَاللَّهُ يَدْعُو إِلَى دَارِ السَّلَامِ وَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invites to the home of peace and guides whom He pleases subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thus, first of all, it is da'wah, and da'wah literally means invitation, not only call, but invitation. And thus, Islamically speaking, we invite others to the way of Allah. We invite others to Islam. We invite others to the realm and the field and the state of peace. We do not proselytize. We invite others. And that's a very subtle and specific and interesting distinction between the missionary activity of proselytizing and between the Islamic activity of inviting. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is He who possesses the hearts, the qulub. وَهُوَ مُقَلِّبُ الْقُلُوبِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى يَصْرِفُهَا كَمَا يَشَاءُ إِلَى مَا يَشَاءُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. It is He who turns the hearts and controls the hearts and directs and orients the hearts towards what He pleases subhanahu wa ta'ala by His benevolent grace and merciful love subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, excuse me, for me to share with you and remind myself and you of some of the essential elements in this very noble activity of da'wah to the home of peace, of invitation to the home of peace, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, as you know, one of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Salam. So when we're inviting to As-Salam, we're inviting to the Divine Himself, to knowing Him, to loving Him, to being conscious of Him, to living every heartbeat, or at least to, alhamdulillah, to strive to live every heartbeat in consciousness of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in loving surrender to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus, in addition to the beautiful ayah that were recited very beautifully by our Shaykh, I'm going to share with you some other ayat that I will, with you, reflect together on what they might be or are actually teaching us concerning the etiquettes of da'wah to Allah, and especially those who involve themselves in the da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the home of peace, at any level it might be. Allah says in the Qur'an, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. First this part. Who is better in speech than the one who invites to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If we pause momentarily here to reflect on these words, first of all, it's like, what is the best of speech? If you want to talk, whereas many of us simply love to talk and say anything and chat, and some people have talk shows and paid millions of dollars simply to talk and to ridicule others and to have fun and to waste time. If you want to talk, Islamically, alhamdulillah, in our values and in the divine values, being too talkative and to speak too much is actually something that is disliked, something that is makruh at least. And that in, alhamdulillah, in the values of our noble deen, we are to speak less and less. And if we speak that which is beautiful. So if we still have the urge to speak, and we are some kind of a person who has not learned to be quiet and to be silent, and has not learned the value of silence, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم طويل الصمت, as he was described in the authentic hadith. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was described that he spent very long periods, extended periods of quietude, of silence. He spoke least, but when he spoke pearls and gems of wisdom. So, if we still have that tendency to want to talk, Allah says to us, the best of speech is when you do what? Invite to Allah. When you use your tongue to invite to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in addition to that, as you know, and by the way, inviting to the way of Allah Azza wa Jal, the right way, the proper way, is a very noble form of dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as you all know also, of the best words to ever utter is to be in dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal. كل كلام ابن آدم عليه لا له إلا ذكر الله تعالى كما جاء في الحديث. All the words that the child of Adam utters will be on the day of judgment, that is against him or her, not for him or her, except dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal. Or نهي عن منكر أو أمر بمعروف. That is da'wah to Allah. So Allah says, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Invite to Allah. Now, دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Let's pause here for a moment. دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ versus, I would say, دَعَا إِلَى نَفْسِهِ. Sometimes, under the garb of da'wah to Allah Azza wa Jal and of others, we are actually inviting to ourselves. We are inviting to our own priorities, to our own whims, to our own likes. And we say we're inviting to Allah Azza wa Jal. In other words, I simply wear the garb of da'wah to Allah while promoting my personal drives, whether they be intellectual, philosophical, ideological, or spiritual and religious. And sometimes, without even being aware of that, because our qulub are a bit masked and clouded, we invite actually to ourselves. And if we observe that, we see that that happens also. I do not know if I should say frequently, but it does happen a lot. And thus, pay attention. مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. إِلَى اللَّهِ. not ila, something else, not to something else, not to self. And therefore sometimes we might do those things for personal gains and self-aggrandizement and so on and so forth. لا ممن دعا إلى الله, i.e. the da'wah to be ikhlas, to invite others with a sense, an internal sense, alhamdulillah, of truthfulness and sincerity and devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. selflessly, that my internal personal drives and whims and preferences do not determine and identify my type of invitation. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Second, وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا, and acts in righteousness, and does that which is beautiful, correct, and upright. Well, this is a specification or a qualification which is very important. In other words, basically what it is telling us, my dear brothers and sisters, that we ought not to invite others where we ourselves are not. Are you with me? We ought not to invite others where we ourselves are not. For example, if you literally invite sometimes to your home, to your home. You invite somebody to your home, and then he comes to your home, knocks at the door, and there is nobody there. And you are not there, and there is no one there and nothing there. That would be something, of course, very improper and very rude and very cruel. Something very base. We do not invite somebody home and we were not at home, and we do that deliberately. No, if I invite somebody to some place to cater to them, and then again he comes to that place and it's deserted and there's nothing and no one. That's very low. That's very cruel. It's very ugly. And thus, what does it mean to invite? When we invite to Allah Azza wa Jal, we should be where we invite, meaning that we should be ourselves, at least striving to be in that maqam, in that moral station or Islamic position and phase or state of mind and of conduct to which we invite others. أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ. Do you enjoin on others that which is virtuous and you forget yourselves? And that is a very clear address to us. And when we invite others, alhamdulillah, to virtue, to peace, that we should ourselves be at least striving sincerely and arduously to be in that state of peace. فَاقِدُ الشَّيْءِ لَا يُعْطِيهِ, as it is said in that parable, the one who does not own something cannot dispense of it, cannot give of it. And thus, I need at least to strive to be at the level of the khuluq, of the etiquette, of the virtue that I invite others to. But at least, as I said, we should be striving. And because we, in da'wah to Allah Azza wa Jalla, in da'wah to peace, the intent is to produce positive change in the hearts and in the mind and in the lives of others. Now, Allah tells us somewhere else, consistent with this ayah, of course, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Verily, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change the state of a people, that is the external state of the people, the change that we seek externally in our societies, in our groups, in our communities, in our families, in our midst, in our nations, if we are not mindful, it says, if they do not change, hatta, until they change that which is within themselves. Until they change that which is within themselves. That's what the ayah teaches. In other words, Allah is telling you and me, who knows you better than I know you, and who knows us better than we know ourselves, telling us about the nature of the laws with which He governs this universe, external and internal. And He says, I will help the change come externally if you, in doing that, you work to change yourself internally. Internally. If I invite others to patience, I must strive at least to be a patient person. If I invite others to be generous, I should strive myself to be generous. If I invite others to be benevolent, I should strive at least, strive to be myself benevolent. If I invite others to be at peace with Allah Azza wa Jal, I should myself be at peace with Allah Azza wa Jal, or at least striving to be at peace with Allah Azza wa Jal. Emotionally so, not only I know that. So whatever I invite to, and the invitation to Allah, invitation to the home of peace, is invitation to values, to divine values, as Rasulullah ﷺ most beautifully exemplified those values. And thus, I should not invite to somewhere where I am not. I should invite where I am, or at least I'm striving to be. My dear brothers and sisters, وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا. A person like that, then, and who speaks words with which to invite others to peace, those words are to be supported, in other words, by what? By amal, by action. And that action is to be with ikhlas. But I at least strive to be in ikhlas. Ikhlas is a very special maqam, a very dear spiritual station. I should strive to be in truthfulness and in sincerity in my actions and in my words. And if there is no action at all, just my words, then that's a sign, at least an indicator, that there is no ikhlas, or very weak ikhlas. But if there is action with words, that's an indicator that there is possibly ikhlas. Action with words doesn't mean there is ikhlas. Without action, and there are words, that means there is almost, or there is no ikhlas. But as I strive and I do work, I should also look at myself internally. I should listen to the moods inside of me. I should listen to my qalb, my heart, my internal emotions, and my internal language inside of me, and voices inside of me. What are they saying? What is the state in which I am as I'm talking to you? We talk to others, we do this, we do that, we agree here, we disagree there. What is in my qalb? And that's very, very essential that we pay attention to. ومن أحسن قولا ممن دعا إلى الله وعمل صالحا. وعمل صالحا. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. Verily, Allah does not change the state and the affairs of people externally until they do produce and work, at least as strive to produce a change within themselves, to change the state of my qalb, in my relationship to Allah Azza wa Jal, in my relationship to the creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes our efforts of da'wah, of teaching, of sharing, of imparting knowledge, are not very fruitful and therefore not blessed, sometimes simply because we are people who, or we are individuals who communicate without striving to act and without striving to listen to the moods inside of them, whether they are consistent with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves or that they are inconsistent with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. Let me put it this way. We all know at the external fiqh, for example, that I should not go to places, I should not use my legs to go, to walk, to go to places where Allah is displeased, right? You don't want to use your legs to go to a bar. You don't want to use your legs to go to a discotheque. You don't want to use your legs to go to something where there is obvious, manifest haram, prohibited immoralities being committed or harm being committed. I should not do that. I cannot do that. A person who has Iman finds himself or herself very uncomfortable to be physically in an environment, in a space that Allah Azza wa Jal does not love for him or her to be. And so also the state of my qalb. My qalb should not be in a state that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love my qalb to be in. أن لا يجدني حيث ماذا؟ حيث نهاني وأن لا يفقدني حيث أمرني. That He subhanahu wa ta'ala does not miss me where He wants me to be and does not find me where He prohibits me to be. Not only physically, but internally, in my qalb. I should not be harboring feelings or drives or emotions or attitudes towards others or towards something or towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that state which is hidden, only Allah knows, and myself maybe, which He does not love. For example, to be internally in a state of arrogance in my relationship with others. That's a state in which He does not want me to be. To be in a state of greed and miserliness. He does not want me to be in that state. To be in a state in which I harbor this very strong desire to be the head and the leader at the expense of everything sometimes. That's a state in which Allah does not want my heart to be. And so on and so forth. My heart should not be in a state, for example, that is conspiring to hurt somebody, physically or verbally. My heart should not be in a state in which I'm looking at a person with my eyes kindly, but my heart is cursing at him or her, or ridiculing him or her. Allah knows that. I should not be in that state of heart. It's not only physically, because, my dear sisters and brothers, the dhunub of the qulub, the sins of the hearts, are worse than the sins of the senses sometimes. Briefly, we should invite where we are, or at least where we are striving to be, honestly, truthfully, sincerely, genuinely. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. That's one who is like that. That's really beautiful. Those words are words that come from beautiful words from a beautiful heart. But they are beautiful words from a mediocre heart, or a stained heart, or an ugly heart. That's not أحسن قولا. That's just قول. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إلى الله وعمل صالحا. Thirdly, وقال إنني من المسلمين. وقال إنني من المسلمين. And it says about all, about saying, about speech, إنني, verily I am, إنني بالتوكيد, verily I am, proudly so, of those who are Muslim. The first meaning of this, the obvious meaning is yes, to be genuinely and lovingly and beautifully proud to be a Muslim. Not to hide it. Not because we're in San Francisco we hide that we are Muslim. What's your name? My name is Mo. What's your name? My name is Mark. Actually, Mo is Muhammad, Mark is Mokthar. Mokthar. Though it is painful to hear, it's not that we ridicule others, that's of course an expression of lack of, and that exists. It's not a fictitious example, it does exist. Simply because we want to hide the identity of being a Muslim because of some of us, because of a complex of inferiority, because of ignorance, because of lack of true faith, and because of certainly not knowing what this beautiful being is about, and how beautiful it is for the world and for everybody, and thus to be proud to express it in ways that are consistent with what we are, for example, sharing right now. وقال إنني من المسلمين. Number one. Number two, وقال إنني من المسلمين means also that I am of those who lovingly surrender their hearts to Allah Azza wa Jal. من المسلمين. And what is a Muslim? Of course, there are layers of being Muslim. أن تشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله. That you bear witness that there is no God but Allah Azza wa Jal, no God but God, Allah Azza wa Jal, and there is and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam is the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. وأركان الإسلام, as you all know, the pillars of Islam, the pillars of Iman. But another layer of إنني وقال إنني من المسلمين, the essence of being a Muslim is what? Who can tell me? The haqiqah of being a Muslim, the essence of Islam is what? Now? Well, حياك Allah, you can say Ihsan. That's i.e. the highest level of expression of that Islam. Indeed. Which is close to saying the following. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he was asked by a man, as Imam Ahmad relates and others, ما الإسلام يا رسول الله? قال الإسلام أن يسلم قلبك لله تعالى وأن يسلم المسلمون من لسانك ويدك. He replied sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, when a man asked him, what is Islam ya Rasulullah? You know what Imam Ahmad related and others? What is Islam ya Rasulullah? He replied sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, Islam is when your heart, that's my point, when your heart surrenders, and that means lovingly, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not your tongue, not your word, your heart. Not an academic Islam. I don't have anything about explaining academically Islam. Not an intellectual Islam. I don't have anything about explaining Islam intellectually. Not philosophical Islam, I don't have anything against that when done properly. But what he's pointing out to sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is you may know all of those things, but it is not in your qalb. It is not in your wijdan. It is not experiential. It is your qalb that needs to be changed and reformed and lovingly surrenders to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until you feel that connectedness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that loving surrender or submission of your heart, of your emotions, of your drives, of your will, of your love to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, sometimes as young men and young women, human beings love other human beings. Is that love that you express to your beloved one, let's say at the human level between spouses, and when you truly love her or he or she loves you truly, is it intellectual? Is it? No. Is it academic? No. What is it? Something you find in you, of which almost you have no control. Emotional, isn't it? Have you ever had something like that towards Allah Azza wa Jal? أن يسلم قلبك لله تعالى. أن يسلم قلبك لله تعالى. That's the key. إنني من المسلمين. That Muslim. That type of Muslim. Muslim are layers. And you could say that's a level of Ihsan. That's a level of Ihsan. And we are, alhamdulillah, instructed as Muslims to strive to reach the level of Islam in which Allah alone is in my qalb, and therefore I live my life as though I see God Himself. وَتَعَالَى اللَّهُ عَنِ الْأَشْبَاهِ وَالْأَمْثَالِ. And may Allah be exalted from analogies or any anthropomorphic insinuation. And that is al-ihsan, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. And that's Islam, but a level of Islam. وقال إنني من المسلمين. And therefore, a da'iyah to the home of peace, a da'iyah to Allah must at least strive more than others to be in a state in his or her qalb where only Allah is. Where only Allah Azza wa Jalla is. أن يسلم قلبي لله تعالى. If you were to look spiritually into that qalb, you find no attachment, no connections, no drives to anything or to anyone except to Allah or to something else by Allah and for Allah and through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you know what I mean. وقال إنني من المسلمين. اللهم اجعلنا منهم. And then he says subhanahu wa ta'ala وقال إنني من المسلمين ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة. Why did he say that? Because the relationship or the connectedness between this and what he said previously subhanahu wa ta'ala. ولا تستوي الحسنة ولا السيئة ادفع بالتي هي أحسن فإذا الذي بينك وبينه عداوة كأنه ولي حميم وما يلقاها إلا الذين صبروا وما يلقاها إلا ذو حظ عظيم. Why did he say that after that? Well, listen to this and you see the connectedness, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah help us all and reform our hearts and help us be of those who say the words from their hearts and strive to live those words. He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-hasana and al-sayyi'ah can never be the same. Virtue and vice can never be the same. Beauty and ugliness can never be the same. Goodness and vile can never be the same. Immorality and morality can never be the same. Right? Goodness, good and evil can never be the same. وَلَا تَسْتَوِي الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ. Actually, I'm not stopping for this adhan because I heard there is an official adhan, and for that we will, inshallah ta'ala, practice the sunnah. وَلَا تَسْتَوِي الْحَسَنَةُ وَلَا السَّيِّئَةُ. Why? Because in this path of inviting to Allah Azza wa Jal, what is always natural to happen to those who invite to the home of peace, to Allah, to khair, to something people or some people are not used to, what will happen? Resistance, harm, hurt, injury, physical, psychological, emotional, social, financial, political, etc., etc., etc. And that will happen. In other words, the one who invites to the home of peace shall often be subjected to harm, unjustly, unfairly. That is sayyah. And thus Allah Azza wa Jalla is drawing our attention to that, and that when we are subjected to that, and when you are subjected to that, your response should be not sayyah, but hasan. Responding to sayyah with sayyah, meaning if you respond to harm with harm, that is wrong. If you respond to harm with justice, which is called sometimes sayyah, as the Qur'an calls it in Surah Shura, that's not sayyah in the sense, in the literal sense, but it is harmful. That's justice that you may do. But better than that, better than justice is what? Is ihsan, is magnanimity, is benevolence. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when you are subjected to that first, remember, hasana and sayyah are not equal. Even if the sayyah is justice. Right? They're not equal. Idfa billati hiya ahsan. Repel that to which you are subjected to of harm and injury with that which is more beautiful. Nay, actually, most beautiful. Or rather, more beautiful. In other words, if I'm subjected in my attempts to invite to Allah Azza wa Jal in the way He subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs me, and I'm subjected to harm, my response to that ought to be only in beautiful alternatives. And then of those beautiful alternatives, I should preferably choose the more or the most beautiful of alternatives. That's what idfa billati hiya ahsan is. MashaAllah. Is that easy? If you have ever tried, your answer cannot be yes, it's easy. It is difficult. Except to whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it, or for whom Allah made it easy. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will miss it. If Allah makes something for the person and endows him or her with an internal, beautiful, spiritual strength, in addition to mental clarity, intellectual clarity, for that person, mashallah, it will be to us relatively easier. But Allah, recognizing that, He tells us, what? After that, وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا ذُو حَظٍّ عَظِيمٍ. He says, that will be for those who practice patience, and those whose portion and share is momentous. In other words, it's a great virtue, it's a great gift from Allah Azza wa Jalla. It's highly virtuous, and what a grace it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have that character. To have that character. And this leads me, in the few minutes I have left before I open to questions and answers, inshallah ta'ala, to the question of character. Remember, my dear sisters and brothers, this deen, though many of us fail to exemplify what the essential elements of this deen are, this deen is about virtue, is about internal beauty, is about character. When there is true Tawheed, and I underline true experiential, wijdani Tawheed, not again academic and intellectual Tawheed only, but when that Tawheed Tawheed sinks into the qalb, and in the qalb there is only Allah Azza wa Jal, naturally the internal characteristics of the abd become beautiful. And do you know why? Because when we say Tawheed wujdani, Tawheed is a masdar from wahid, which means internally and actively you have only one inside of you. The active affirmation of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you read that spiritual maqam of Tawheed experientially, which means in your qalb there is nothing, no attachment, no will, no love, no hate, except Allah and by Allah and for Allah Azza wa Jal. Now when we say Allah is in my qalb, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam teaches, inna lillahi ta'ala آنية من أهل الأرض وآنية ربكم قلوب عباده الصالحين والحديث حسن أو صحيح عند أهل العلم. So he's telling us that Allah has vessels, and the vessels of Allah on earth are the hearts of the righteous people. Now to make it real, if Allah is in your qalb, you're that righteous muwahid, and Allah and only Allah is in your qalb, He's in your qalb with His, by His sifat, by His attributes. Now, the sifat of Allah and His attributes are described as what? As how? وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. Beautiful. So your qalb is filled with what? With the beautiful names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Your qalb becomes identified by with the beautiful names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And therefore inside of you, you are beautiful. And therefore, you express what you are inside. The beautiful asma of Allah Azza wa Jalla, Alim and Hakim, Rahim, Kareem, and so on. And therefore, if there is Tawheed experiential, the khuluq will be beautiful, naturally. But my and your khuluq sometimes are ugly, or mediocre, or deficient, because, and that simply means, because the experiential Tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal in my qalb is deficient and mediocre. It is not truly experiential. There is still so much in my qalb of stain and of attachments to other than Allah Azza wa Jal. وَاللَّهُ فِي قَلْبِي لَيْسَ وَاحِدًا بَعْدُ. قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم. This Iman here that is in this ayah is this Islam that we're talking about. Character. And therefore to invite to character. By words, by deeds, and by ahwal. And the states of our qulub inside of us. What was it, last week or so, I was asked to speak about what would be, under the circumstances in which we live nowadays, let's say in America, as Muslim Americans, as American Muslims, Muslim Americans, what would be the main character that a da'iyah should focus about? In addition, of course, to all the characters, what would be a main character? I chose the following. The character of Haya. The character of Haya. That character which is translated sometimes as what? Shyness, modesty, bashfulness, and so on. All of those are part of Haya, but none of them is equal to Haya. Istahya in the Arabic language means to show Haya, but it also means what? Literally, Istahya means what? Istaf'ala. Yani, kept alive. Kept alive. Resurrected, resuscitated, revitalized, kept alive. And it means kept alive, to keep alive, and it means to be in Haya. SubhanAllah. And al-haya, that's the only difference. And they both come from the halq. The difference between haya, life, and haya is you heard it. That's the only difference. It means, subhanAllah, that if there is no haya, there is no haya. That is true life, the life of the qulub, not the predatory life, or animalistic life, or cattle-like life that some of us human beings share with other animals, eating and drinking and copulating and sleeping and existing. Well, animals do that too. But a quality life. Without haya, there is no real life. And as you all know, I believe, my dear brothers and sisters, or most of you or some of you do know, that the more the world or people or communities or groups or individuals or societies, the more they become more materially affluent, the more we lose this character. Isn't it true? The character of Haya. And that's very, very dangerous. Because the defining character of Islam is what? Haya. Who said so? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. إن لكل دين خلقا وفي رواية إن لكل شيء خلقا وإن خلق الإسلام الحياء. الحديث صحيح. The defining character of Islam is Haya. And since we're living in times and in environments and in more and more affluent world and more materialistic world, this is the character we have to guard. Because it's defining Islam. It's a constant of Islam. It's not a variable. It's not open to be changed, to be altered. It's a constant of our deen. The haya in men, the haya in women, that state in which one feels uncomfortable to offend the other. Allah, the angels, the invisible creatures, other creatures, to the extent that even when one is alone out of haya, would not do or say or harbor that which is improper. SubhanAllah. Not only that, sometimes even some things that are lawful and legitimate, but they're not mustahab, they're not recommended, they're not obligatory, that one out of haya would not do, would not say in front of others. You know what I mean, right? You would not do that in front of an elderly teacher, or your father, or your mother, if there is still some fitrah, good fitrah left in us. That's haya, that's beautiful. وَكَانَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ أشد حياء من العذراء في خدرها. If you want an example, well, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the most sophisticated man that the world has ever known, and the most spiritual man that the world has ever known, by the grace of Allah Azza wa Jal, he was described by his companions in the authentic hadith. He had more haya than a young unmarried woman in her private quarters, who has never met a man, but experienced with a man, how bashful she feels, how shy she feels. And you know what I mean by this. And where we are going in terms of the lack of our haya. وَالْحَيَاءُ حَسَنٌ وَلَكِنَّهُ, what does the text say? النِّسَاءِ أَحْسَنٌ. Haya is beautiful. A man without haya is ugly. A man with haya is beautiful. A woman without haya is even uglier. A woman with haya is even more beautiful. The text teaches, my dear sisters and brothers, الحياء خلق هذا الدين الحياء. الإيمان والحياء قرنا جميعا. In another authentic text, إذا رفع أحدهما رفع الآخر. Iman and Haya, faith and Haya have been forever joined together. If one of them is lifted, then the other consequently is lifted. Less Iman means less Haya. Less Haya means less Iman. And that's what it means. We don't have to lose Haya, my dear brothers and sisters and those who invite Allah Azza wa Jal in every one of us. We don't have to give up Haya to be truly American. We don't have to give up Haya to be democratic. Many other Americans who are not Muslim, who value these virtues. Your role as a Muslim is to moralize democracy. Your role as a Muslim is to beautify and make it even more beautiful in value America through such virtues as Haya. And prosperity and affluence and power, if they are not properly managed and properly controlled and properly directed and oriented, they would lead some of us to easily give up some of the most important constants and virtues of our deen and of the beauty of life. One text teaches, and I close with this. A text teaches, some ulama say it is da'if text. But da'if, the meaning of which is good enough, and it is not to be rejected completely. In which it is related that Rasulullah speaks of the signs of latter days. And, you know, in alamati as-sa'a. He says, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in accordance to this weak text, he said, أول ما يرفع من هذه الأمة الحياء والأمانة وآخر ما يبقى من دينهم الصلاة ولا يصلين أقوام لا خلاق له. End of quote. Which means of the first, i.e. characteristics of this deen that shall be lifted from this ummah, this nation of his Muslims, he said, you know what? Al-Haya, latif. And second, two of them, and trustworthiness. To be a trustworthy person, reliable person, trustworthy person. These are the first two, in accordance to that text, virtues of this deen that shall disappear. And people will continue to pray. Because he said, and the last of that which will disappear of this deen is salah. That's the last. But it's the last. To the extent that some people will still perform salah, but have no share with Allah Azza wa Jal. وَلَيُصَلِّيَنَّ أَقْوَامٌ لَا خَلَاقَ أَيْ لَا نَصِيبَ لَا حَظَّ لَهُمْ مَعَ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى. I.e., some of us will be performing salah, but our akhlaq, our character, is vile, is ugly, is antithetical to the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Islamic beauty and prophetic beauty. And or also, some of us come to salah, but we come to salah and we are not in salah. Our hearts and minds are always away from Allah Azza wa Jalla and from salah. تصلي بل تحضر أبداننا، لا نقول تصلي أبداننا، تحضر أبداننا ولا تصلي قلوبنا. Our bodies are present, but our hearts are not in prayer. But more consistent with what I'm saying here, my dear sisters and brothers, is that the disappearance of virtue if we as Muslims contribute to the disappearance of those virtues, then what is dawah for? You cannot have peace inside of you if inside of you you're removing some essential attributes of peace. And Allah, of His essential attributes is, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that إِنَّ اللَّهَ حَيِيٌّ, says Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, يحب الحياة. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يستحيي, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in ways that are consistent with His, of course, essence, with His that, and with His sifat, subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah Azza wa Jal, my dear sisters and brothers, and me and you, inshaAllah ta'ala, cleanse our quloob. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us purge our quloob. May Allah Azza wa Jal help us do that always and first and in priority as we or before we invite others to those virtues, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the home of peace. And yes, Ya Allah, you know we are weak. Allahumma inna du'afa'u faqawwi fi ridaka da'fana. We are weak sometimes, we know, but we don't have that energy and that drive and that internal certitude and that internal emotional experiential momentum to do that which we know is right. We are weak, Ya Allah. Forgive us and help us. اللهم إنا ضعفاء فقوي في رضاك ضعفنا خذ إلى الخير بنواصينا واجعل الإسلام أي إسلام قلوبنا واجعل الإسلام منتهى رضانا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد النبي الأمي الرسول المبين رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله الطيبين وصحابته الميامين والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We have few about 15 on Athan, and after that if you have some questions until about 8 o'clock inshallah. Okay, is there any question? Alhamdulillah, if there isn't, then I advise you to be in dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, and to do some salah and some dua.
There was a proverb or some hikmah says, إذا لم تستحي فافعل ما شئت. هذا related.
الحديث الصحيح إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. Indeed, Rasulullah is related to have said that of the early words of wisdom, of prophetic wisdom that reached people, even in Jahiliyyah time and before and in his time, is إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. if you have no haya, then do what you please. What does it mean? It simply means that exactly what it is, the concept of freedom of the self, to do what I want. And to do what I want, regardless of what's around me and who's around me, that's exactly lack of haya. So he says, when we lose that, when we develop inside of us lack of haya, we are going to do what we want. إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. Which is, though it sounds like if you have no haya, then do as you please, it doesn't mean it's a license to do what you please because you have no haya. It's indicating that if you have no haya, you are going to do what you want only. At all levels, intellectually, ideologically, sensually, physically, words, verbally, we're going to say, do, feel, think what we want, and that's lack of haya.
And just to follow up, is that the same character with those nudity clubs?
Obviously, that's of course the most obvious, vulgar expression of that. It says nudity clubs. That's the most vulgar expression of that. I'll give you an example, very subtle and very beautiful, about a lack of haya in the earlier days. To eat outside was lack of haya. Okay? To eat and walk and eat outside is lack of haya. Not to wear a turban is lack of haya. One Salih, it is said, Sayyiduna Ali Zayn al-Abidin ibn Hussein ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, he said, whenever he eats with his mother from the same plate, whether they eat, he never eats with his mother in the same plate. And yet the tradition in those days is we do that. That's mubarak, that's blessing. And so that taxi was asked, why do you do that? Why don't you eat with your mother? You know what he said? He says, out of haya and out of fear. What do you mean? He says she's eating and maybe in her qalb, her qalb's eye wants something specific from that food, from that part of the food, and I somehow inadvertently, unknowingly, eat that part. فَأَخَافُ أَنْ أَعُقَّهَا. Allah Akbar. He calls that عقوق الوالدين. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. تستحي and forgive me, my dear brother, أستحي أن أمد رجلي. I was going to say it before I saw you. I'm sorry, some people can't because of the knees. Yes, I know. أستحي to extend my legs in a masjid, in front of others. That's haya, because that's makruh. Some of the salihun, my dear brothers and sisters, look at their level of haya. I forgot his name. He never extended his leg ever in front of anybody or even alone. Alone, he said, out of haya from Allah. نعم؟ الله تعالى. أنا أعرف واحد من جيل التابعين وتابع التابعين نسيت اسمه. جزاك الله خير. Imagine that. I'm talking about that type of haya. Nudity, that's vulgarity and that's haram at its most vulgar expression. I'm talking about these subtleties. To be in a jama'ah of ulama or shuyukh or elders and I speak before them, that's lack of haya. One time one Salih says, you're walking with your father in those days, and if you walk in front of your father, that's lack of haya. Allah. Talking about this type of haya sensitive, to be haya sensitive. But when we have lost that so often, we become coarse, C-O-A-R-S-E. We become rude and rough, and we're not even aware that we're doing anything wrong. Because the haya measurement in us, our spiritual meter, is very coarse. You know, if a thermometer is calibrated at 0 degrees only, 0 and out, when it's minus 30, what does it read? No, when it's minus 30, what does the thermometer read? It reads 0. Very warm. 0 relative to minus 30 is very warm. So it doesn't tell you where you really are. When the thermometer maximum reading is, let's say, 60 degrees Celsius, and it is outside 80 somewhere, it's going to read 60. It's not fine-tuned. When my qalb is not fine-tuned spiritually, I do not detect, you know, the ugliness and the sensitive level. So may Allah, and so we should turn to Allah. I do not absolve myself. Indeed. So that's why we turn to Allah devotionally and humbly. Ya Allah, help us see our faults. We are ugly, help us be beautiful. We want to be beautiful, but sometimes we don't know, or we think we know. Sometimes we know, but we are weak, Ya Allah, help us. And certainly the one who comes to Allah through the gate of bankruptcy, as they say, is the one whom Allah will help. What does the gate of bankruptcy mean? I should not direct myself to Allah while coming to Allah thinking I have come with so much big resume to Allah Azza wa Jal. Because I have done this, I have done that, I have taught, I have learned. No. The best way to come to Allah, closest way, the most immediate door to come to Allah through it, is the door of bankruptcy. I come to Allah knowing and feeling I have nothing in my resume for Allah that is worth anything. And this is certainly the khuluq of the righteous man and women of our beautiful Islamic heritage, my dear sisters and brothers. Yes. Any other question?
Is it naturally born with the Haya? And if so, what kills it?
In general, as the ulama teach us, hafidhahullah ta'ala, the awliya of those ulama teach us, and experience shows that sometimes some people are born with certain beautiful qualities, but they lack in others. Not everybody is born with all beautiful qualities and all ugly qualities. For example, you find for somebody to be, for example, Haya is very easy. It exists. I know people who la ilaha illallah, they are like a well of Haya, naturally, without any difficulty. But for example, but that person lacks in other virtues, has to strive to get to those virtues. And so it is with Haya. Some of us, alhamdulillah, are given that gift by Allah Azza wa Jal. Some of us have to strive for that. What helps or what stains that?
What kills it? What kills it in us?
Right, that's what I mentioned earlier, remember? The affluent styles of life. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَن رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. Says Allah Azza wa Jal. Verily, the human being goes to excesses. طغيان إن لما طغى الماء حملناكم في الجارية. طغيان يعني to overflow, to be excessive. And thus Allah tells us the human being, when he or she finds himself or herself or perceives of himself or herself as self-sufficient, is led to that excess. Is led to that, to that excessive attitude, excess in aqidah, excess in akhlaq, excess in words, excess in attitudes, excess in kala and kala. So, Allah Ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala huwa al-muwaffiq. Khairan jazakum. Yes, sister.
You spoke earlier about Islam is there a way
Exactly. What I would say, answering the question, is that I earlier mentioned something about intellectual, academic, philosophical Islam versus experiential Tawheed and qalb Islam. How do we distinguish between the two? How do we know? Well, first of all, intellectual, academic Islam and philosophical Islam, that's easy to know. You learn that in school. You learn that in books. You learn that through teachers. You memorize that. You know that. You talk about that. That's what it is. That's intellectual Islam, that's academic Islam, and so on. You do not live it inside of you. How do I know the difference? When do I know I have something like that? You know? The way I respond to external stimuli internally. For example, they said, there's even a text that teaches, a hadith that teaches, I forgot the level of its authenticity, where Rasulullah teaches something like this. If you want to know your maqam, your hal, your position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, look at the position of the maqam of Allah in your heart. In other words, do I have that emotional inclination towards God? Do I respond very quickly or very slowly to a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do I, if I falter and fumble and make a mistake and sin, do I respond quickly in repentance and in asking for forgiveness and in remorse and in pain, and I find the pain and the shame inside of me, or I don't at all? Do I, as I have that intellectual knowledge, etc., do I find moments alone and love to be alone in dua or in salah, alone, and I cannot wait to be alone so that I can talk to Allah. I can be in sujood. How am I in my salah? How am I when I remember my dhunub, my sins? Does my heart cry? Do my eyes overwhelm with tears? Etc. This is how I have some indicators, some isharat at least, about whether I have something in my qalb or it is only an external, intellectual, academic, and so on. And that's, I think, one way, my dear sisters and brothers, to do. If I'm in dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, does my qalb, not only my tongue, get involved, and do I find peace in dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal? Do I find peace when I'm alone in dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal or not? هل أجد أنسا بالله إن كنت في خلوتي وحدي في ذكري ودعائي مع الله أم لا أجد من ذلك شيئا؟ هل أجد حلاوة في عبادتي أم لا أجد من ذلك شيئا؟ Am I in a hurry to be with people intellectually, philosophically, or am I in a hurry to be alone with Allah Azza wa Jal? And to be with people is a job that I have to do to convey a message, because that in itself is not intended. What's in itself is that my qalb changes and your qalb changes. Things of this nature by which I'm helped to gauge whether my qalb is involved or not. And I can tell you, you can know when you love your daughter or your son or someone else, and you don't. And you know to make a distinction between somebody you like intellectually and somebody you like emotionally. You know the difference, right? So that could also help us make that distinction, my dear sisters and brothers. Yes, sister?
So now we know for sure that our hearts are very damaged, and we know the goal that we should reach by to reach the beauty of the heart. But we need to know the actual steps that we should do. Like we keep praying, but I notice that praying is not like, it doesn't help a lot.
Exactly.
We need
And we have only 3 minutes left. And then usually I do that in retreats that take 10 days, where we talk about to try to answer that question. But not by not speaking only, by not only speaking, but by doing more than we speak, in terms of trying to help ourselves by the grace of Allah through what the Qur'an teaches, the Sunnah of Rasulullah teaches, and the awliya and the ulama teach, rahimahullah ta'ala, practically things to do and to strive for in order to gradually, by the grace of Allah, our qulub would reach that high. But I leave you with two things. After having said that, I leave you with two things. Number one, a lot of dua. لن يصل أحد إلى الله بجهده إلا بالله. إلا بالله. اللهم اطلبني برحمتك إليك. اللهم اطلبني برحمتك إليك. واهدني بنورك إليك. وأقمني بصدق العبودية بين يديك. لن يصل أحد إلى الله إلا بالله. No one reaches the divine God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without Allah, despite our efforts. And our efforts are necessary, but they're not sufficient. الدعاء 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 هو العبادة. Number one. Number two, a reminder of myself, my dear sisters, كثرة ذكر الله تعالى. Strive to be prolifically, frequently, constantly in dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, and involve your qalb in it. And to involve your qalb in it, you need sometimes to be completely alone for 15 minutes, for half an hour, for an hour, for 2 or 7 hours. بما فتح Allah. And only in that hal, striving and learning to involve your qalb in it, because that does wonders to the qulub. ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. This, in summary, and briefly in answer to that question. لا لا جزاك لا بأس لا نصلي الحمد لله. ما قل ودل, and that's why we have to practice more than we speak. جزاكم الله تعالى خيرا. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا مولانا محمد على آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
Jazakumullah khair. On behalf of our community, I would like to thank our brother, our scholar, Shaykh Mokhtar, and really it's a very, very spiritual speech and muhadara, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us, inshallah, to practice and to implement in our life, inshallah, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make that in His scale of hasanat, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us through the best, inshallah. Okay.